Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night or early morning for those joining us from beautiful Pacific. My name is Cristina Larrea, and I lead the Sustainability Standards Workout team at IISD. And it's my real pleasure to welcome you to this webinar that we are hosting today on the topic of South-South trade and voluntary sustainability standards, a topic that we are not that used to speak about. I'm here today with two of my colleagues that have done a fantastic work putting this report together that we are discussing today. Stephanie Bermudez, Policy Advisor, and Florencia Sarmiento, Policy Analyst. We have also with us an exceptional panel of 4 guest speakers that we will introduce later on, and with whom we are eager to discuss and learn more about their innovative experience on South-South trade and voluntary sustainability standards. Next slide, please. We have organized today's sessions in 2 main parts. In the first one, we will learn about 5 examples on how voluntary sustainability standards have been integrated into trade policy to enhance sustainable trade between developing countries. In the second part, we will learn on concrete ways governments can coordinate and use sustainability standards to promote South-South trade. In both parts, we will have the opportunity to dialogue and exchange with our panelists. So I invite you to write your questions or formulate your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section at any time during the session, and we will be able to take them through the session. Before giving the word to my colleague Stephanie, please allow me to provide you with few remarks to provide a bit of context of this topic. Trade between developing countries and regions is growing rapidly, and this can open market opportunities for producers and small and medium-sized enterprises in low-income countries and diversify their market relations. As we see in the graph from UNTAD, in the first graph from UNTAD, in the right, the first one, the one that is more on the left, the value of South-South trade has increased since 2005, the orange bars, even more than the value of trade between South and North, the bars in purple. Okay, so we see the trajectory of growth. And as we see in the second graph, the one on the right, the value of trade of all the regions in the global South with China has increased since 2005. See the horizontal orange bar. But especially the value of trade between Southern countries from different regions, which are the horizontal green bar, have increased considerably since 2005 and for all the regions. Next slide, please. In this context, the growth of South-South trade is very critical that supports good social and environmental practices, which can include soil conservation, soil health, forest conservation, and the respect of fundamental human rights, while improving market access opportunities for producers and small and medium-sized enterprises. And this is where the linkage with voluntary sustainability standards comes into play. So indeed, according to recent data from ITC Standards Map, there are about at least 50 voluntary sustainability standards operated in the Global South. And this includes schemes that organizations in the South have established, such as ARSO, Ecomark Africa, or Viet Farm, or those that have been established by organizations in the North, such as Fair Trade or Global Gap. So developing countries are increasingly using these tools and integrated in trade policy for different purposes. However, common challenges associated with their use that we are very aware of, such as the proliferation of schemes, compliance cost, their formal recognition, or the existence of market demand, may have prevented governments and sustainability standards to achieve their full potential. Well, today, we are going to learn and engage in conversation with representatives of 4 experiences that have integrated public or private voluntary sustainability standards into trade policy in practice, helping them to address these issues of concern, but more importantly, helping them to advance sustainable agricultural practices and increase market access for small-scale farmers and SMEs. I would like to give the word now to my colleague Stephanie, who's going to present briefly the main characteristics of these 5 examples, and then we're going to have the dialogue with our guest speakers. Please, Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone for joining us. So yeah, I will say that the highlight of our recent report on South-South trade and voluntary sustainability standards are these case studies. We have analyzed 5 examples of countries and regions that have started to integrate voluntary sustainability standards into trade policy to enhance trade of more sustainable products and services between developing countries. So our first example is the Pacific Organic Standard. Yeah, this standard was developed in 2008 by Poetcom, a network of organic farmers and regional stakeholders in the Pacific with the support of the Secretariat of the Pacific Community. This standard is the 3rd regional organic standard produced in the world after the European Union and the East African Organic Standard. And it's a very interesting case because they managed to design a standard that is adapted to the local needs of producers and the specificities of the territory, while also aligning with international principles for organic production. The standard also relies on the mutual recognition of PGS systems, or participatory guaranteed systems, that are complementary tools for third-party certification in the organic sector. These are based on the active participation of producers, but are also an affordable option for small farmers who want to sell in local and regional markets. So farmers can commercialize their products using the Organic Pacifica mark. Participation in PGS is also seen or used as a stepping stone to obtain third-party certification and access export markets that demand it. So in this case, they can access markets in New Zealand, in Australia, or the US. Since the inception of the Pacific Organic Standard, organic production has increased in the Pacific. As of 2020, over 10,000 growers were certified under the third-party option, and 11 PGS are operational in the territories, representing about 2,000 producers. Our next example is the Mutual Recognition Agreement on Organic Agricultural Products from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And this is an ongoing initiative that looks promising to the region. Currently, the ASEAN members are making efforts to align their national organic standards with the standard for organic agriculture of the ASEAN that was adopted in 2014. So far, the national standards of Brunei, Darussalam, the Philippines, and Singapore are aligned, and the remaining member states are revising their national standards. So the next step is the development of this mutual recognition agreement on organic agricultural goods. And this is an initiative that is being led by Thailand. So the objective of this agreement is for products that meet the national organic standards to be recognized in the regional market too. So currently the draft text of the agreement has been discussed and is expected to be finalized next year for signing. So this benchmarking will open and dynamize the organic market within the region, but it also looks to reduce some barriers to trade. Our next example is the EcoMark Africa. And this is an important, ambitious continental effort that is being led by the African Organization for Standardization. The EcoMark Africa works as a recognition system for sustainability standards in Africa, but it also works as a quality assurance mechanism for production and trade of agricultural, forestry, fisheries, and tourism products and services in the continent. And what's interesting about and unique about EcoMark Africa is that it has been designed to enable benchmarking with other regional and international sustainability standards that already operate in the continent. So this development of a continent-wide and cross-sectoral standard is crucial to tackle some of the challenges in the region, like the reduction of barriers to trade, while also promoting quality and sustainability in products and services. So we will hear more about this initiative in the discussion, but this effort has the potential to benefit many African smallholder farmers and small medium enterprises, as it will open many market opportunities for producers in Africa. Our next example is Namibia and Zambia and the collaboration with Global Gap. So both countries are engaging now with Global Gap, and Global Gap is an international voluntary sustainability standard. And they are looking to support sustainable production practices in each country. So this can result potentially in joining efforts to boost the trade of compliant products in the Southern African region. First, in Namibia, the Namibian Ministry of Agriculture presented a draft legislation in 2022 to develop Namibia's food control system for agronomic and horticultural products. And this legislation will include as a requirement to producers to comply with the local GAP standard. And the local GAP standard is an adapted version of the international standard that is more accessible to farmers and is adapted to local conditions. So this will be the minimum national standard for local products that are for sale in Namibia and other neighboring markets. And on exchange, Global Gap will provide training and assistance to Namibian producers and operators. And in Zambia, the government is also working with Global Gap to train small-scale producers of fruits, vegetables, aquaculture, rice producers, particularly on safety and quality. So the interest of these two developments relies on their needs of these countries to advance sustainability, but also to promote and mainstream safety and quality products. And other requirements, for instance, requirements to protect workers' health, safety, to enhance biodiversity and soil fertility or water efficiency. So these efforts in both countries can potentially result in the wide use or recognition of Global Gap in the region as an effort to enhance trade of more sustainable and trade products. Okay, so our next example is the IAOPS, the East African Organic Production Standard. And this standard was adopted in 2007 by the East African Community. It was the second regional organic standard created in the world after the European Union. And it is the official standard for organic production in East Africa. So producers under the IAOPS can use the Kilimo mark to commercialize their products within the region. Many different crops have been produced under this standard, like maize, rice, fruits, and spices that are mainly sold in local markets. So the highlight of this initiative is that the IAOPS also recognize PGS systems to make certification process more accessible. So groups of farmers can apply to certification together. And as an example, as of 2021, 60 farmer groups were certified using PGS and IAOPS licenses in Tanzania. And more than 9,000 farmers were organized in 14 PGS groups in Uganda. So this is very important. There are some challenges, though, particularly on the official recognition and the adoption of the IAOPS at national levels. However, many stakeholders, particularly organic networks, are doing important efforts to move and operationalize the IAOPS. And also countries in the region have been very active by generating an enabling policy environment to promote organic production. And for example, Uganda officially launched its national organic policy in 2020, and the Kenyan Ministry of Agriculture has created a dedicated desk for organic agriculture. And our final example is the Memorandum of Understanding of Organic Products between Chile and Brazil. So this memorandum was implemented in 2019, And it is the first mutual recognition system for organic products between South American countries. It is also the first one in the region to recognize participatory guarantee systems. And as a result, farmers associated through PGS groups in Brazil and Chile don't need third-party certification to commercialize their products. In 2020, there were over 20,000 producers involved in PGS in both countries, and they produced wine, fruits, and other processed products such as dried fruits. And this has resulted in very positive results and numbers. So after 3 years of implementation, trade of organic products increased significantly between the two countries. For instance, Chilean organic exports to Brazil rose by 24% as of 2021. And this is in terms of volumes of trade. So this has benefited producers and small and medium enterprises in both countries that have gained access to new markets and improved their ability to invest in and expand their operations. So that's for the examples. Now, in our report, we analyzed how each of them have helped to address or have the potential to address some of the barriers to the integration of standards in South-South trade policy. And as you can see in this table, some of the examples have contributed to reduce some barriers to trade. For example, the IAOPS and Global Gap require in their criteria and designed to work towards recognition with other national, regional, or international standards. And they also have processes in place to prevent and control transboundary pests and diseases in crops. So their integration in trade policy can potentially enhance intra-regional trade, but by also increasing agricultural productivity and reducing the cost of control or preventative measures, or as well as rejections across borders. Also, this example shows that there is a way to work with the voluntary sustainability standards or encourage their use while also lowering cost of compliance. And this is the case of the PGS systems in Africa and the Pacific, where small-scale farmers can get recognition for their goods for less money than with third-party certification. PGS are more affordable and more affordable option, while also promote collaboration among farmers and support traditional practices. And in the case of boosting trust and recognition, the case of Chile and Brazil also show how willingness to collaborate and long-standing commercial relations can benefit both governments and enhance trade opportunities while also supporting more sustainable practices. So these efforts can also increase demand for standard compliant goods. The same example of Brazil and Chile suggests that after the implementation of the MOU, the trade of organic products between both countries rose significantly. So implementing these measures, mainly when there is evidence of increasing demand for more sustainable products, can also increase market access for standard compliant products. And finally, some of these examples also shows the interest towards promoting the harmonization of standards. And EcoMark is the perfect example, as it was conceived as a certification recognition system for national and international sustainability standards operating in Africa. So going forward, the IAOPS, for instance, could benefit from being benchmarked under the EcoMark Africa to help harmonize their schemes and catalyze trade for standard compliant goods between East Africa and the rest of the continent. So to finalize my presentation, some quick analysis of the initiatives, and you can find these results in our paper. So we understand that these cases are context specific and have particularities. Some of the factors that have contributed to the successful inclusion of standards in trade policies in some countries may be not present in other contexts and regions. Also, the majority of initiatives that we analyzed are public-led or relate to public-led standards. However, the case of Namibia and Zambia show that synergies between private standards and public action are possible and can address critical issues like food safety, water and soil, and pest management. These examples also show that the relevance of establishing accessible standards and local versions, but not only establish them, but officially recognize them and support them, as this can increase smallholder market access while promoting more sustainable practices. So overall, these examples show that these countries are trying to address major barriers to trade or major barriers to integrate the standards in trade policy. And all of them ultimately seek to lower trade barriers, help small-scale farmers and SMEs access markets, and improve trade and cooperation. So that's for the presentation. And I think now it's time for the discussion. So I would really like to introduce our dear panelists that have joined us today. And we have today Mr. Claudio Cárdenas. He's the head of the Department of Organic Agriculture at the Division of Protection of Renewable Natural Resources, Agricultural and Livestock Service from the Ministry of Agriculture of Chile. We also have with us Mr. Charles Gachahi. He's the EcoMark Africa Coordinator of the African Organization of Standardization. He's joining from Kenya. We also have Ms. Jennifer Buvi. She's the Key Account Manager of Global Gap Kenya. And we have also Mr. Jim Pierce. He's the coordinator of the Pacific Organic and Ethical Trade Community, who is joining us from Fiji today. So welcome to all of you. And many thanks for making a space in your busy agendas for today's discussion. But I'm sure that all here will benefit and appreciate your thoughts and experience. So just a note to our audience, I will ask 2 questions to each of our panelists, but please feel free to write your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will try to pick a few to address after our discussion. So I will stop sharing the screen so we can see our faces. And I would like to start with Mr. Jim Pierce. He's, as I mentioned, the coordinator of PoetCom and is joining us today from Fiji. So, Mr. Jim, are you there? Yeah, I see you.
I'm here, thank you.
Yeah. So I want to especially thank you for making the effort of being here, being past midnight in Fiji. So we really appreciate this. My first question to you will be, what are producers' main benefits from complying with the Pacific Organic Standard and PGS systems? If you can share some examples.
Sure, I'd be happy to, and thank you so much for letting me be on. It's an honor to be here today. I think the main benefit for any voluntary standard, including the Pacific Organic Standard, is access to markets, specifically the niche markets. The Pacific has unique trade challenges because it's so remote and so isolated, and transportation costs can be very limiting to potential trade. So with the addition of an organic claim and the PGS claim, it's given operators that niche market. It's no longer just virgin coconut oil, it's organic virgin coconut oil. It fits well with the 70% that relate as farmers in the Pacific, because these are small subsistence semi-market farmers. So it fits very well with their system of farming, but also because we put an emphasis in the Pacific on culture and tradition. So it gives them a platform to market what they're doing, what their parents and grandparents have been doing. And we found that niche marketing works very well. There's also a great potential through the organic to add what we call geographic identity. Chocolate, coffee, vanilla, all do very well, not only with organic, but if they are Vanuatu vanilla or Fiji coffee, like that. So it's given them a great advantage that way. Always, something that's amazed me in the Pacific beyond the financial benefits of marketing organic are the externalities, and that's very real throughout the Pacific. Climate change mitigation, NCD addressing, food sovereignty and food security, all of those are really high on the list of why people farm organically here beyond just getting a better price. So I think I could do a long time, but I'll leave it at that, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I think that's key, like the unique challenges, you know, like the transportation costs that you mentioned, but also the externalities. I think that's very important. And my second questions will be, in your opinion, what are the 2 or 3 enabling factors that have facilitated producers' compliance with the Pacific Organic Standard and PGS in the Pacific nations and territories?
Okay, thank you. Without a doubt, the most important success of the Pacific Organic Standard has been buy-in and promotion at the high government level. The Pacific community, where POETCOM is housed, is the technical body throughout the Pacific region. When the Pacific Organic Standard was developed, it was brought before the heads and ministers of agriculture of the 22 Pacific countries and territories, and universally, unanimously endorsed by the heads and the ministers. So very often we'll get a little bit of uprising of one country saying, well, we need a national standard. And it's very easy to go back through the governments and say, you have a national standard. You have a regional standard that's been accepted by your national government. And it's really helped to standardize and uniform the organic. When we developed the standard, we had codex in Australia, New Zealand, Europe, US, Canada, all on the table. So it's a very well-balanced standard. But the other enabling factor that's really helped ours take off is, in addition to the 4 principles, health, ecology, fairness, and care that come from IFOAM, we've added culture and tradition, because culture and traditional farming methods are so important here to preserve and to pass on, but also to show off. They're not being lost, they're being perpetuated. And that emphasis on culture and tradition has really helped to adapt the PGS and the Pacific Organic Standard to the context of each country. And I think that's enough. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, this is fantastic. Like, and as I mentioned in my presentation, what's unique about this case is that it is a system adapted to the context. So that's great. Thank you, Jim. So now moving to our continental initiative, I will ask Mr. Gachahi from Ecomark Africa. He's the coordinator. Hi, Mr. Gachahi, are you there? Yeah, we can see you.
Yes, I'm there.
Perfect. So welcome. Thank you for being with us today. So we would like to know what kind of support is needed to make this Ecomark Africa benchmarking effort beneficial for farmers. And I ask this given the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area and the multiplicity of standards operating in the continent.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. First of all, to observe that this scheme is owned by the African Organization for Standardization. Just a minute, I shut off the noise. Very sorry about it. So this Ecomark Africa is owned by the African Organization for Standardization, which is a membership organization or made up of national standards bodies from Africa that deal with standards. And where a national standard does not exist, then any government department that deals with standards and trade becomes a member. So we have 2 core mandates. One is on harmonization of standards, and the other one is on operating a conformity assessment system for Africa. And this is where ECOMAC falls in, because under this conformity assessment system, we do have a program, we call it ACAP, that has got currently 11 schemes. And one of the schemes now is ECOMAC Africa, that deals with sustainability and eco-link. So this is a type 1 label that is awarded to products and services that comply with African sustainability standards. And currently, we have about 9 or so. We have on agriculture, fisheries, tourism, forestry. We also have got on tilapia, African catfish, and then on cocoa. And we have been able to build capacity for SMEs, particularly on the implementation on this standard, and then supporting them in terms of auditing and certification for the award of the ECOMAC Africa, which, like I said, is an environmental and sustainability label over to, of course, products and services complying with African standards. So during the implementation, we did find some challenges, and I think this is where now the support would come in. First of all, in terms of the scheme, as you are aware, there are other schemes which are operating within the continent, Global Gap, Rainforest Allowance, and you can name them. And our scheme is actually not competing with these schemes, but actually complementing the work that they are doing to ensure or to promote what we might call sustainable production, consumption and production through implementation of standards. So one of the areas we would like support, for instance, is maybe coming up with a scheme gap analysis within the other schemes. Of course, we know at a meta-standardization level, we are addressing the same issues of environment, socio and economic. But the way these standards address these issues is different from one standard to another. And therefore, a gap analysis of this scheme would be able to bring out what are the major differences and how can we collaborate, even eventually towards maybe once you agree how you can even be able to issue a dual label, one of ECOMAC and the other. So that is one area. The other one, of course, which is related to that is actually the actual document review to see what are the major differences. So at the moment, because our scheme is young and the others have been operating, for us to convince the consumers that our label is as good as the other, we need this support in terms of those maybe standards, those comparisons, so that once we are presenting, even as we are creating awareness on our scheme, we should be able to tell them, yes, we have these standards, we have these voluntary sustainability standards, but they are not very different from us, and therefore you can trust that products that are added our label are are okay, and you can be able to rely on them for purposes of maybe procurement, that you are buying products that are supporting sustainability. The other issue, of course, is capacity building. Capacity building of the SMEs. We know even for established organizations, these standards are fairly technical, and therefore in terms of implementation, you need to break them down for the SME, and sometimes even they will require to change equipment so that they are able to comply with these standards. So there is need for capacity building and also support because of the inherent problems of SMEs, particularly financial, to support them in terms of auditing and certification. We know certification is not cheap. Sometimes it would go from $8,000 or $10,000 for certification, and this is not little money. And particularly now that we are just coming or recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are areas that we think we need in terms of capacity building, supporting auditing, and then for the scheme itself, benchmarking against other schemes. We have been working closely and we have been able to for instance, sign an MOU with Fair Trade Africa, and also in terms of promoting the feasibility of our mark and our farmers, working with the ITC, UNEC, and also to some extent UUL, the other writers laboratory, so that we can see how we can be able to promote the standards. In actual fact, our standards now, you can be able to find them under the ITC sustainability map. So I want to submit for the time being there, but ready to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. I think you make a very good point and a very good explanation of what EcoMark takes into account. So my second question will be, how will EcoMark increase affordability? I think that's one question that I see also in the chat box. How make this effort affordable, and also what are the strategies in place to promote demand for certified products or standard compliant products among African consumers?
From where I sit, the main component, first of all, of auditing and certification is the cost of the auditor himself from any particular scheme. And depending on where he or she is coming from for purposes of auditing, then this makes a big chunk of the auditing and certification fees. And therefore, for us, what we are trying to do is build capacity, first of all, for the certification bodies within the continent, so that they are able to audit and certify products within their regions, which means that from country A to country B, you can be able to use local expertise for purposes of carrying out the audit and also licensing and also award of the EcoMark. Because ASO itself, although it's the scheme owner, does not audit or certify. It uses third party for purposes of auditing and certification. As long as you are you have been accredited to the African Conformity Assessment Program, first of all, and then also the international standard ISO 17065. So if you comply with that and you are assessed by an accreditation body and you qualify as a certification body from whichever part of the continent, then we can be able to license you for particular scopes that you comply with. For you to audit and award EcoMark for Africa. So that is one component, building capacity within the continent. The other one is the issue of benchmarking. This is where I talked earlier on about gap analysis. What are the actual differences? Maybe you could check at what is really different and how can it be addressed so that you can be able to take it on board as different schemes. And therefore, you can also do what we might call a combined audit, which means a certain auditor from a certain scheme. You don't have to go as two auditors, but you can be able to audit based on maybe a combined checklist for different schemes. So these are areas that we have been trying to work together and also trying to see how we can be able to work with other schemes so that we can be able to address this. In this case, then you are able to reduce the cost of, to a certain extent, the cost of certification for the industry.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Gachahi. So now I would like to hear from Ms. Jennifer. So Ms. Jennifer Mvuvi, she's the key account manager of Global Gap Kenya. So I want to know, what do you think are, or were the main factors that allow the collaboration between the Namibian government and Global Gap?
Thank you very much for this meeting, and thank you everyone that is participating in this meeting. Forgive me for my low voice. I'm not quite okay today. But to give you a background into the collaboration between the Namibian government and Global Gap, knowing all too well that one is a government and the other one is a private sector. Number one is that we are collaborating with the Namibian Agronomic Board. And the Namibian Agronomic Board in Namibia is the statutory body that was set up since 1985. And the mandate for the Namibian Agronomic Board is to promote the agronomic industry and to facilitate production, processing, storage, and marketing of controlled products in Namibia through market regulation. And these controlled products are actually products that will be gazetted by the government on a needs basis. The Namibian Agronomic Board, which is what is partnering with Global Gap, is actually governed by the Agronomic Industry Act, number 20 of 1992. So you begin to bring in legislation here governing the operation of an organization. So what the board then went on to do is to develop a strategic plan, as is with every other organization. And in their plan of 2019 to 2024, one of their plans was to develop the agronomic and the horticulture industry through market facilitation. And the second one was to ensure responsive regulatory framework through the implementation of the Namibia food control systems for agronomic and horticultural products. And it's inside here that they wanted to lead to the enforcement of compliance to quality and food safety requirements. So in the process of looking for how they were going to enforce compliance to quality and food safety requirements, they had to look at these requirements. And this is the reason that led them to know that they have to implement good agriculture practices. And when they looked around to see where can we get good agriculture practices that will be implementable by a cross-section of the farmers that we are dealing with, that is when they came across the local gap PFA standard of Global Gap. And because one of the mandates also that they want to do is to ensure that they have controls over the imports and the exports of the country, they also had to think about the Global Gap full IFA standard. So I need you to be aware that there are two standards in place here. There's the local gap IFA for the very, PFA for the very smallest of the farmers and the new farmers that are coming on board. And this is what they're planning to roll it out as a national legislation that is going to be adopted by every producer within the country. And the beauty of it is that in partnership with Global Gap, we did what we had to do. We had to start with training of their inspectors in their country who will be able to do the inspections of the implementation of the local gap PFA standard. But before we train the inspectors for assessment, we had to train what we call registered trainers. These are the people that are going to build the capacity of the farmers to be able to understand the local gap PFA standard and to be able to implement this. And this was done in a very smart way that we selected a few of the employees of NAB itself, and also private sector players were brought on board, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to have the choice of who you want to be able to support you to understand and implement a standard. Then after that, we trained the inspectors, because these are the ones that are going to be able to do inspection within the country. And part of this is also to work down on the cost of auditing, which, as I've heard across my previous panelists, is one of the reasons why certification cost increases. And then ultimately is to also set up Namibia Agronomic Board as a verification body, so that they don't need to be outsourcing from out of Namibia, where you have to pay the cost of an auditor to come in and conduct the audits. You can be able to check within NAB itself, and there will be somebody to do the verification. And after verification, then you will be able to get the letter of conformance. What we also need to understand here is the reason Namibia Agronomic Board decided to do the adoption of the local gap PFA is that our local gap PFA in Global Gap is designed as a capacity building tool, meaning that there are several levels that you will need to go through before you achieve the ultimate goal. And at each level, you can have a discussion with your market that if the requirements at this particular market, at this particular level are agreeable with your market, you don't need to go beyond that. But if the market says that we need you to be able to do more than what you have right now, then you can be able to increase the requirements on an ongoing basis. So it allows an easy entry. It allows you to build your capacity during the implementation until such a time that you feel ready to move into the next step. And the beauty of it is that by doing or by implementing the local gap PFA, it is actually a stepping stone to your being able to implement the full global gap IFA standard that is also beneficial for you to be able to do export. So if you're not doing export, you do not need to go to the full IFA standard. But if you're doing only local production and your market is agreeable with that level of implementation, then you can still maintain yourself at that particular level. Yeah, so this is how we designed the partnership, which is actually public-private partnership between a statutory organization of a government and Global Gap itself for them to be able to adopt our standard, which is actually free of charge. And the beauty of it is we are a scheme that have developed the standards, so we are the ones responsible for its maintenance and everything. So the Namibian government does not have to go through any extra cost of maintaining the standard because we are maintaining the standards ourselves. Any changes that we do, we are changing ourselves, and we are presenting the changes to the specific organizations for implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's amazing and a great example of public-private partnership and alliances. So how can we ensure that this integration of global gap in national legislation in Namibia and also the partnership with Zambia don't affect small-scale farmers? So what measures, I think you already started to answer that question, but what measures will need to be put in place?
Yeah, one of the things that you need to realize is that as Global Gap in our standards, this is a voluntary scheme. But the moment it is taken on as a government and now it has to become legislation, then it becomes the responsibility of the government to ensure that the legislation does not affect their own producers. But before they even do that, there are a lot of safety nets within the Global Gap standards to ensure that there is no negative impact on the implementers. Number one, we are giving you a standard that you cannot also voluntarily choose whether you want to implement or you do not want to implement. But when the government imposes it on you that you have to implement it, and the beauty of what Namibian Agronomic Board has done is that there's the element of market linkages. So it is going to enable you to be able to access markets if you have implemented the standards. Looking back at the benefits of implementation of the local gap PFA standard is that it is going to enhance your visibility even in the local market, apart from also enhancing your visibility on the international or even the regional markets. So there is no negative impact for you to implement this standard. It is also going to enable you to increase your productivity, because what we realize with the implementation of standards is that before production is just done without following any rules. But the moment you begin to follow rules, then productivity increases. We cannot look down on the benefits to the environment itself. This is a standard that ensures great gains to the environment itself where you're doing your production. And apart from that, then increasing incomes. When your productivity increases, then your incomes increase. So as an organization, this is already embedded in our standards. This is already the outcome of what we get by those that are implementing the standards. But also as a government, it is also what they have to put in place to ensure that their producers are well covered and they're well protected. And one of the things that you also need to know is that within the Southern African region, there are already discussions, and not only discussions, but part of the reason why we are also implementing the same in Zambia, or we have discussions to implement the same in Zambia, is because the local market players in Zambia say that we will not be able to buy your products unless you're implementing the local gap PFA, because some of the local market players happen to be based in South Africa, and in South Africa, the ShopRites, the Spars, and the Pick and Pays are already having an experience with the local gap PFA, where they have seen that it is a very good capacity building tool to enable them to be able to at least demonstrate some level of compliance with food safety rules and sustainability production for their farmers. So because of this, When it comes to opening trade, because as I told you, one of the components of the Namibian Agronomic Board is to check on the goods in transit, is that if a product is going to come from Namibia to Zambia, as long as it carries the local gap number, then it is allowable to be able to move within the country. If it is moving from Namibia to another country and it meets with another product that has the local gap number, there's no need for double checking, there's no need for doubting. The product is already compliant with the requirements that the market is asking for. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is amazing. And definitely public support and enabling institutional environment is very important to ensure that farmers are not affected by these type of measures. So to finalize the dialogue, I will now ask Mr. Claudio Cárdenas, head of the Department of Organic Agriculture from the Chilean Ministry of Agriculture. So thank you so much, Claudio, and the colleagues from the Chilean Ministry of Agriculture that join us today. So my first question will be, how are Chilean organic producers benefiting from this MOU? What is the main advantage for the smallholder farmers, and particularly to those associated with PGS?
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you and the rest of the specialists that are here today. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. The Memorandum of Understanding that has been signed consists of two parts. It has two main goals. First of all, deals with international trade and recognizing the organic standards both in Chile and Brazil. It also has a goal of cooperation between both countries. Chile and Brazil have a long history of cooperation. So it wasn't something that was very difficult for us. It was a less complex road to travel to be able to achieve between our two countries this type of agreement. The starting point was a recognition of equivalency between both standards. This is an agreement between ministries. It's not a commercial agreement. It's a technical agreement between the MAPA in Brazil and the Agricultural Ministry in Chile. Now, how has this benefited small producers? Mainly organic producers, those who work through participative systems. In Chile, we call these ecological producer associations. We've done this through widening their access to markets in the first step. We've opened our borders so they can market their products not only in Chile at a local and regional level, but they can also do that because they are acknowledged by the Brazilian authorities as well. This has grown bit by bit through the work from the different organizations, and we now have several examples of exchange between Chile to Brazil and from Brazil to Chile. This involves participative systems. And that's what it is essentially. Our goal is to strengthen this, to make this, to show other countries that this is a reality, that is possible, something that can be achieved. The recognition between countries to recognize each other's participative systems. Our agreements when it comes to organic products you currently only work through a third-party certification. These are it has companies that are recognized under current ISO standards. Here in Chile, we use a different one. We have our own internal control system, and that provides a guarantee to the country that our systems will work when it comes to certification.
Thank you very much, Claudio. Yeah, I think the the partnership between both countries and the long-standing commercial relation and trust has been key to develop this commercial exchange. So my next question will be, how does the coordination between institutions across borders work? For instance, in compliance with sanitary and phytosanitary measures, inspections, or audits?
El sistema o el memorándum de entendimiento.
The MOU that we have is provides or documents an understanding that's based on the quality that producers provide. In other words, it's an organic production system, an ecological system. This does not alter our sanitary and phytosanitary qualities of the products. So to be able to enter the market of each one of our countries, they have to meet those health guidelines. The organic guidelines are not above those of the standard animal and plant health regulations of each country. First of all, they have to meet those goals, those requirements, and afterwards they'll have to meet the certification process to be considered certified organic. We've had good results with our customs authorities in both Chile and Brazil. At each of the entry points to Chile and Brazil, we have things set up. In Brazil, being a federated state, they do coordinate both at the regional level with the central administrative body at the federal level. Now, something that's very important to understand is that what was developed here was a harmonized system. This system, what it does is to recognize equivalencies between each country. We were able to do this, and I must point this out. We were able to do this. When you look at South America or Latin America, and even North America, we do have the Inter-American Organic Producers Organization looks at overseeing and promoting organic production. Through this association, we are able to speak to each other, and through those conversations, we are able to reach agreements. And this agreement that we have was through that association. That was a starting point. I wanted to point out that importance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Claudio, and all our panelists for this amazing dialogue. And I see there are some questions in the chat box, and Christina has been responding them. I'm not sure if we are in track with the time, so
yeah. I will take one now and the others in the second part of the dialogue, just to give some space to the second part. And it's an important one that refers to the PGA system. So maybe Jim and Claudio, Mr. Jim and Mr. Claudio, you can answer this. How do we ensure ongoing buyer confidence where third-party certification has been replaced by other mechanisms, such as PGA systems in Brazil, Chile, as well as in the Pacific? So basically, how PGA systems can give trust to buyers. What is your experience on this, Mr. Jim and Mr. Claudio? Perhaps, Mr. Jim, can you start?
I could start, thank you. And that is a good question, because the PGS is essentially a second-party certification. I inspect your farm, you inspect my farm. But as a result of that, it's a conversational system. It's not one of bureaucratic oversight. It's one of mutual assistance. And in such, there's also this built-in system of self-policing where everybody's brand, everybody's success relies on the cumulative integrity of that PGS group. And what we found is that it is very often much more rigorous and much more transparent than a third-party system, which is a once-a-year snapshot inspection of the operation. These people know each other, and they know who the honest ones are. They know which ones to watch more closely, and it has turned out to be extremely effective. The other quick note on that is that PGS is primarily for shorter value chains. So there's usually a personal or at least reputational understanding between the buyers and the sellers, which is more like buying at a local market. You know the people, you know their practices, you might be personally familiar with their farms. Yeah, and we've seen that works quite well to uphold the integrity. Where that starts to fall apart is where mindset is more towards the third-party governance system, and it's a bit of a constant struggle to continually reinforce that integrity point. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jim. Mr. Claudio, something to add? Given that PGS systems, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, perdón.
No, sorry. I just wanted to add to what Jim said. Yes, the system needs to be trust-based. And in the case of the MOU between Brazil and Chile, it's based on trust. And of course, the guarantee needs to be given by the government. In this case, the certificate has a stamp, and there is the official production stamp of Chile or Brazil in this case. And of course, it needs to be backed up by the fact that there is a state control, not only private control, not only private oversight, but also an internal oversight and a government oversight. This needs to be transparent, as Jim said, this is crucial. And also we have to be transparent with our information, registries, and of course, rules need to be very clear. It's important that countries know each other before they enter into such an agreement, and this will provide feasibility to the system.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Claudio, for answering this, both of you. Let's give the word now to the second part, Florencia, who's going to present us briefly some of the recommendations of the report.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you all for such an interesting discussion. So now turning to the second part, let's talk about some opportunities and what are our recommendations. Next slide, please. So the analysis of the examples that were just developed and that we have analyzed in the report essentially show that sustainability standards can increase sustainable trade between developing countries and regions. And at the same time, they can promote sustainable agricultural practices, delivering sustainable development outcomes. They can also improve smallholder access to markets because they open new markets. The main conclusion of our report is that governments in developing countries are increasingly interested in using VSS as a tool, and they are trying to address and tackle the problems that directly or indirectly prevent their adoption. What we found is that there is a common objective to lower trade barriers, to help smallholder farmers and SMEs access markets, to improve agricultural practices, and to also increase trade and cooperation. But there's more that can be done, and we have seen that there are some persistent challenges that remain, such as lack of government support or lack of coordinated action or lack of recognition, which is why we should now turn to the recommendations. What can we do to leverage VSS potential in South-South trade? I must say that the recommendations that we put forward are based on the report that we are presenting today, but also in our other research, such as the regional reports on VSS in East Africa and South Asia, and the SSI review on VSS and poverty reduction. Now, the first recommendation that we put forward is for governments to strengthen the institutional and regulatory policy framework with VSS and vice versa. Developing countries can, for instance, incorporate some of the sustainability criteria in the sectoral policies. And an example of this was what was mentioned by Jennifer on the collaboration between Global Gap and Namibia and Zambia. The second recommendation is to leverage and learn from other experiences and initiatives. The integration of VSS in trade policy is not new, and countries can learn from other experiences and initiatives that are already in place or are being developed. So as mentioned also by Claudio, the MOU facilitating trade between Chile and Brazil can serve as an example for the other countries that are wishing to do the same. The third recommendation that we're putting forward is to provide support for smallholders to reduce compliance costs. Smallholder farmers should not be left behind, and the compliance cost is one of the key challenges faced by smallholders. Developing countries that have supported and recognized PAG systems in trade policy have in fact shown that they can reduce compliance costs in accessing certification. And the examples that we mentioned in Tanzania, Uganda, and Chile and Brazil showcase how PAG systems can be accessible, affordable, and widely implemented to support local and regional value chain while also opening markets and keeping the door open for third-party verification if other export markets require it. There is also the possibility of offering capacity building and training on VSS compliant practices for smallholders, or making some arrangement, cost-sharing arrangements so that the cost of the audits becomes more accessible. The fourth recommendation is to create an enabling environment for the uptake of VSS in South-South trade. The successful integration of VSS in South-South trade policy requires a supporting environment. This means that we need to design and implement effective incentives. VSS and governments can do that so that the producers have an incentive to use, adopt, but also to maintain these standards. And these incentives can be, for instance, providing minimum prices or offering a premium above market prices that rewards those farmers that are implementing sustainable practices. It can be to provide a tax benefit to local processors that source from VSS compliant products, or even launching campaigns that promote more sustainable consumption at the local and the regional level. And the last recommendation is to continue to seek harmonization and establish mutual recognition. The governments that are interested in using standards in trade policy, they need to explore how to promote mutual recognition and equivalent system between existing VSS, because this type of systems not only increase the synergies between the VSS, but they can also reduce the implementation and certification cost for smallholder farmers and enabling marketing opportunities. An example of this is ARSO that we mentioned, developing the Eco Mark Africa that is open to benchmarking with other standards, or the collaboration between Chile and Brazil. To finish, we have put forward one recommendation for VSS bodies that can consider, which is to develop local versions of VSS that are adapted to local conditions. VSS can have a greater impact on their integration in South-South trade policy when they consider the local context. By adapting international standards to local needs, we can help expand the reach of farmers and lower the cost for compliance with VSS. Thank you very much for... okay, thank you. So now I would like to turn into the discussion with our distinguished panelists and ask some questions before we can move to the Q&A. I don't know if Steph, if you want to stop sharing the screen so we can all see each other. I'll start by asking Mr. Claudio Cárdenas a question on the MOU between Chile and Brazil. So my question is, what structures or arrangements have the Chilean or Brazilian government established to make the recognition of organic products compliant with PGS systems work effectively?
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias, Florencia.
Okay, thank you very much, Florencia. Well, rather than structures, we established this MOU, as I explained before. It had two scopes. One scope was related to trade. It has to do with the recognition of the source standard. On the other hand, we have the agreements that include cooperation. In this sense, the structure has to do with oversight and promotion authorities. What we have agreed is that we want to strengthen the organic sector in both countries. The PGS system falls within both countries' systems. Both Brazil and Chile have acknowledged the third-party certifications as well as the co-op systems or those standards from environmental producers associations. That's how they're named in Chile. Here we're establishing which are the production conditions, the certification processes. Therefore, it was a lot easier to advance the regulation aspect because that's the most complex part. When a country has gaps in regards to the other, the regulation part is the most complex one to tackle. So we started working on official documents, additional documents. Of course, we acknowledge the differences between Brazil and Chile, but we still comply with the equivalence principles. I would say this is important, but also we need to acknowledge that between Brazil and Chile, there's a crucial difference. Brazil has 200 million inhabitants, and Chile has 20 million. That is a big difference, and a priori it favors Chile because Chile has an exports vocation as compared to Brazil that has an import vocation. Brazil uses up almost 100% of the local production locally. And Chile is a country that has the possibility of exporting and offering products to Brazil. Also, there are agroclimate differences. There are products in Chile that are not produced in Brazil, and the same happens the other way about. This favors the exchange of products and ingredients for organic production, and that is also favorable. That's talking about trade. Now, regarding cooperation, strengthening production systems, acknowledging the experience of one country and the other, that countries are part of this experience recognition. This is basically what I could say about this.
I think it's great to hear that despite the differences, Brazil and Chile were able to find a common ground and support each other and find some alignment with the common objective of increasing the trade of organic products. So it's very inspiring to hear the experience of Chile and Brazil. Now, turning to Ms. Jennifer, I would like to ask you, can you share with us 3 key considerations that VSS should take into account when developing local versions that are adapted to local conditions?
One of the things that is really key to consider is the demand from the market or the demand from the buyer. Because many a times you will realize that the market is very clear on exactly what they want. So they will be able to tell you the exact requirements that they want for you to be able to comply with, for them to be able to give you a market for their product. So if you talk to the market, if you discuss with the market, if you have a partnership with the market, then the market will be able to give you their demands. And also, it also means that you will not be able to implement anything if the market does not ask for it. So there is no cost attached to this. Secondly, or just even in addition to why you need to speak to the market, to speak to the buyer, is because many a times you will also have some buyers that have a department that is ready to also support you in the implementation. So all the more the reason why you need to speak to them and get their demand first before you doing the implementation. The next thing that you need to be able to consider is, especially because most of the local production and most of the local sales is actually coming from the small producer organizations, because you realize many of the large producers are more of producing for export. It is very important to implement only a standard that is within their capacity to implement, suitable for them to be able to implement that. Because if you give them very high requirements, it is highly unlikely that they will be able to take on this standard, because they will look at the cost implication for them to be able to shift from their current status of production to another status of production that you're asking them to do. So if you can give them something that is suitable for them, and even something that enables them to be able to graduate exponentially until they reach the level that you want, then that would be that it will be easy for them to adopt this. Then it is also important to give training to all the stakeholders that are involved in this national standard. You don't just develop a standard, it's a national standard, and not even the nationalities themselves are aware of the standard. So all the stakeholders within a particular value chain, if you're doing something in fruits and vegetables, you need to bring all of them into a training session, raise awareness to them about this standard and why you're developing this standard, get their buy-in, get them to understand the context of this local standard that you're developing, but also ensure that they have the skills that they require to be able to support the standard. So if it is the trainers that need to train the farmers, if it is the farmers that need to be trained by the trainers, if it is the certification or the verification bodies that will audit, all these stakeholders require training for them to be able to support this. So these are just among the few of them that I can think about, but there would be many of them that you need to consider, including even the buy-in from the stakeholders. They need to have a buy-in. Somebody will ask you, if I can eat a banana in the village that has not been taken through certification, if I come to the city, why do you demand that the same banana needs to be certified? So even getting a buy-in from the stakeholders is very critical to ensure the implementation of these standards. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to hear that all the things that you are mentioning are very much in line with what we find in our research. First of all, the importance of demand. What we've seen is that there's still a lot of potential to increase demand for sustainable products, and that you need to make that list also to have an incentive for the producer to comply with the standard, and the importance of capacity building. Like we focus on smallholders, but it's true that it needs to be across the whole value chain. So the importance of that is key. Thank you very much for sharing. Now turning to Mr. Charles, I would like to put a focus on political recognition. So we've seen that political recognition of standards by government is often seen as one of the key challenges when we are seeking for harmonization of standards and mutual recognition agreements. What strategies can African countries take to overcome this challenge, in your opinion?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, one of the strategies is first of all, to create awareness among the key stakeholders. Like has been observed by Jennifer there, key stakeholders, whether government, whether the implementers, you need to create that awareness on the importance of having one continental standard rather than having different standards. Because if you have to move a product from one country to another, and remember we are now talking about facilitating trade using standards, it means if you are not using the same standard, the same testing method, the same testing procedure, and then issuing the same certificate for recognition, it will be very difficult for you to move a product from a country A to country B, even within the continent, where we are talking about increasing intra-Africa trade. Currently it allowed, I think, 14 or so %. So you have to show them the benefits of why you need to have a continental standard. The other thing is you have to show them the benefit of pooling resources so that you are able to achieve the same goal. If you develop a standard at national level, at regional level, now we have 8 legs within the African continent. All those resources, and you are coming up with different standards that will not be able to help you move goods and services across the continent. It would be better if those resources were put somewhere and then used to support harmonization of a continental standard. In that case, you can be able to support at national level. You can be able to support experts to sit in meetings that develop standards at a continental level. So that's another thing. And then the other thing is once you have done that as a strategy, then it is convince them now there is no need for dealing with the regional standards or continental standards. The other thing is you could do is like promotion of mutual recognition agreements within members so that you can be able to show them the benefits of using a common standard. And in Africa, we have been able to initiate one that currently is being promoted by 6 countries. We have Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, so that they are able to identify a group of standards and then use a common standard, which is an African standard, that can be used for purposes of testing, purposes of implementation within the member states. The other strategy that we have used is actually to talk like we have already signed an MOU with the AFCFTA in terms of implementation of Annex 6 of their protocol, that for purposes of trade within the African continent, that legislation now is there in terms of an MOU that is only African standards that will be recognized for purposes of trade. So something similar to even also what was being mentioned earlier, the issue of talking to the various governments and regional economic communities to withdraw their national or regional standards where they exist and replace them with African standard, so that you can be able to be implementing one standard. That is also something that we continue to engage members on, so that we can be able to move in one, move on the same line of trying to promote the movement of goods and services using the same standard. So those are some of the strategies that we are using for that particular purpose. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all these different strategies. I think, I mean, bottom line, we need to create awareness, and it is very important to seize all the regional opportunities to show the benefits of coming together and to create, to enable a more efficient use of our resources. Now, I would like to pose a last question to Mr. Jim. Very briefly, could you please tell us what are the most critical gaps that need to be addressed for smallholders in the Pacific to access additional market opportunities and commercialize organic compliant products with other markets like New Zealand, Australia, and the US?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think the response to this will not really come as a surprise. I think we've touched on most of these points, but the first critical gap to be addressed is equivalence or recognition of the standard and also of the PGS system. And while that's worked fairly well in the Pacific, it's something that it threatens any longer market change. For example, right now, New Zealand is developing their organic regulation and standards. Their regulation is in place now, they're developing the standard. So we're continually at the table reminding them that their standard is not much different than our standard, and that if they go the route of the first world countries like the US and the EU and say everything that's organic coming in or is sold here has to be directly certified to our standard, that they're going to cut off a lot of the organic supply that they've been depending on from the Pacific, but also that the farmers have been depending on from this end. The second one we've also touched on several times, and that's the cost, especially the cost of auditors in the Pacific. The PGS system is been successful, and it serves as a stepping stone towards third-party certification, but we're working on developing a pool of regional auditors, because right now certification is expensive, and it's really expensive when we have to bring in auditors from outside of the countries in order to do these. And typically in most countries, there's not a lot of third-party clients. So it's important that the certification bodies sort of network and collaborate together in order to make efficiencies of what inspectors we do have. And we have a project that's working on both of those. And then I think the last one is one that comes up, that I'll mention, is one that comes up all the time, and that is people understanding the true cost of food.
Yeah.
They're very price sensitive to the cost of food in the Pacific. So when they see a higher cost for an organic similar commodity, the question is, why does it cost more? Or I simply don't want to pay more. But the understanding is that that's the true cost of food, and that there's a lot of hidden costs with health and environment in that cheaper food. That's a global issue, and it's something we'll never be able to put into our rearview mirrors in as far as filling those gaps. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And your answer comes as a great conclusion to our discussion, right? The importance of continue to seek harmonization and mutual recognition, the importance to support smallholders and lower the cost of certification. And I think the true cost of food is related to this, the importance to enhance and promote sustainable consumption. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I'll give the floor to Cristina.
Thanks very much, all our distinguished panelists and Stephanie and Flor, and the audience has been very, very active formulating questions. We have formulated some of them at the session, others we have addressed in the chat. I would like to close the remarks, being mindful of the time, with a few thoughts. I think harmonization is key. We just hear this experience from Chile, Brazil, Africa also ARSO, and is promising there is more examples of harmonization to enhance South-South trade. This is key. Also, another point that I would like to raise is the trust and the robustness of the schemes is critical, and the trust between actors is also critical, has come a few times in the conversation. And the last point that Mr. Jim put on the table, the real cost of food and the cost of externalities. And this is something that IISD we're going to continue working on this. Thank you, all the great panelists for being with us today, and the audience, very engaging. We will share responses to some questions that were not addressed when we will share the recording. Thanks all, and have a lovely day, and looking forward to connect later on. Thank you.